Everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, quick match gameplay. This time around, we are playing a bit of a classic old-timey matchup of Empire against Greenskins on the map, the Oasis of Lost Hope. And so for my Empire build, I decided to go with a fairly standard build. I know one of the more common things you see nowadays is, of course, the Witch Hunter cheese. It's really the strat that's really taken off. It's something that a lot of people hate dealing with for obvious reasons. Especially, it's really potent, especially against factions like Greenskins, because they don't really have any source of regen. They don't have any healing. So all they really have is their raw HP pool to try to protect themselves. So it's a really powerful cheese strat against them, but I didn't really want to go for that. Nonetheless, I did want to give Barfazar a shot, and I thought he would be useful with the sort of build I was bringing here. And so for my Lord, Barfazar Guild here on Quicksilver. He does have Transmutation of Lead for that debuff. He does have Plague of Rust, and he has my opponent brought Black Orcs because I don't have the best of AP here. A few Great Swords won't hold up, and I don't have any other AP sources, so I figured that if I need to deal with, say, a few units of Black Orcs, it would definitely be best if I'm able to debuff them with Plague of Rust. Shearing Doom is also a rather good spell, which I think people underestimate. It does cause quite a bit of damage, and can definitely lay the smackdown on some more heavily armored troops as well, so definitely wanted to bring that. And of course, Barfazar Guild, especially with evasion here, is super fast at 112 speed. He's basically uncatchable but for the Orcs. They really can't do much to him. Even Azag only has 110 speed, so unless he pops Foe Seeker, he's not able to do it. Finally, of course, he does have Metal Shifting, which does provide a boost to weapon damage when he's casting. And, of course, the Staff of Alans and the Arcane Conduit, which provides him with near infinite winds of magic. He's definitely one of those casters that can just spam spells over and over. For my front line, I did decide to bring a kind of classic combination of just vanilla spearmen, backed by some great swords, and 2 Empire Captains. And, of course, the Empire Captains help provide sort of a buffer. They can dish out some hurt, and they can kind of keep your troops together, keep them safe, and soak up hits that would otherwise be going against your squishier infantry. Behind them, 2 units of crossbows. Figuring that my opponent might bring skirmishers, the Greenskin skirmish line is definitely something you got to watch out for. I think a lot of people underestimate both the mounted skirmishers as well as the goblin firing line that the Greenskins tend to put on the field. The crossbows are pretty good against those. They're pretty good at shutting them down. They'll do well against Savage Orcs. And they'll actually do well against Orc Cavalry as well, because Orc Cavalry tends to have trash armor. In the back, 2 more units of spears just protecting the front line. And then out on the flanks, we have a combination of Reichsguard and Knights of the Blazing Sun. So a little bit of staying power with the Reichsguard. The Reichsguard, of course, much more well-rounded, much tankier, and much less offense-oriented. And the Knights of the Blazing Sun. Knights of the Blazing Sun, of course, are the offense-oriented, super high charge bonus, high weapon strength, high melee attack. So very offensive-oriented. And I have two of them, one of each on each flank. And these guys will trash just about any Greenskin cavalry except for the Broken Tusk Mob, which happens to be one of the units my opponent brought. Otherwise, they'll actually trade even well with Orc Boar Boy Big Guns because their armor's just so bad, and their melee stats are pretty trash too. For my opponent, he did decide to go with a pretty wide and in some ways interesting build with no Black Orcs. For his Lord, he did bring Azag, not entirely surprising. He's a pretty common pick, though no Fate of Buna. He did bring Aspect of the Dread Knight, which is a bit of an interesting choice. Usually you'll see it comboed with Doom and Darkness, but we don't see that here. He does have the Scroll of Power for faster ability recharge, Wah, which is because that's a great boost. Only have Leeching for great power recharge, and of course Foe Seeker for that speed. For his front line is a bunch of goblins. These guys, of course, are atrocious, but they are expendable, and they do have silver shields, so if I try to shoot them with my crossbows, I'm going to struggle. They are backed by some Squig Herds. These guys have great AP, a bonus against infantry. They do Rampage, which is a little unfortunate, but otherwise they can definitely shoot through great. For example, Great Swords are actually really susceptible against them, because Squigs do have 26 melee attacks stacked on top of 11 bonus for his infantry, so the Great Swords are really not very survivable against that. Beyond that, a whole bunch of Savage Orc Big Guns. These guys, of course, will trash heavy cavalry pretty effectively just because they hit like trucks. Fortunately, they're no armor, so they are kind of susceptible to charges themselves. And they are backed here by an interesting firing line of Savage Orc Airboys as well as the Rusty Airs. So Savage Orc Airboys, of course, can dish out a lot of hurt. They can even dish out a good bit of hurt in melee just because they have high weapon strength and melee attack. And the Rusty Airs will be debuffing my troops and making them more susceptible to damage. Especially units like Great Swords could suffer pretty badly from that, or my cavalry. On the flanks, my opponent does have a mix of Night Goblin Squig Hoppers as well as Orc Boar Boy Big Guns, providing a little bit of support here, and it's definitely some heavy anti-armor presence. And of course, the Broken Tusk Mob does provide encouragement as well. Over here you can see a Spirit Leech going down on Barfazar. Over here the Knights are getting some early charges into these Gobos, just trying to whittle them down early on. You can see a nice charge here into the Savage Orc Big Guns, getting some massive value against these troops. My opponent does charge into my Spears here with a Squig Herd, but the Great Swords you can see are just trading incredibly effectively. The Captain is in there to stiffen up those Spears, and the Squigs do count as large, so they will definitely lose against the Spears. This isn't the most optimal matchup. They should have been thrown against the Great Swords. Meantime, over here the Cavalry is kind of grouping, regrouping. You can see here in the pits, the crossbows are doing their very best. The greatswords have buckled these gobos very quickly, but unfortunately on the flank here, my cav is doing much worse. I should have definitely shifted my crossbow focus to help him. You can see the Night Goblin Squig Hoppers will get run down, but the rest of my cav will just get broken and routed. In the meantime, I'm shifting some of my spears around. You can see I'm trying to exchange fire here with the rusty arrows. My opponent, in turn, of course, peppering me down with all that arrow fire. Over here, of course, the Staff of Alon and some spells going down. You can see the transmutation of lead going down on all these troops, helping counteract the wall a little bit, and making them much more susceptible to all this damage coming through. Over here, the Great Swords are kind of pushing through. You can see the Savage Orc Big Guns are not really that much of a match for Great Swords. They don't have that much AP, and the more cavalry chargers just coming in, piling on these guys and crushing them. Unfortunately, I didn't really pay enough attention. I don't realize these are Savage Orc Arrow Boys, but they will hold their ground much more effectively than I would have liked. Over here, Balthazar Gelt is getting hit by a bunch of arrow fire. He's been hit by Spirit Leeches, and now with my casting of abilities here, you can see this will actually do quite a bit of damage. Unfortunately, definitely quite a bit of friendly fire as well. But it does mean that Balthazar is very low on HP. Spirit Leech does go down on him. I'm not quite fast enough on the draw. I should definitely pull him away a long time ago. I wasn't paying enough attention to him, and Balthazar is going to rout and flee. Over here, this Broken Dust Mob has kind of crushed my heavy cav. You can see they've routed off somewhere. I don't even know. They might be. Actually, no. One of the Reichsguard did win, but the rest of them routed. Over here, though, the Orc Boar Boy Big Guns are getting shut down by the spears. They are not a match for these guys at all. They're pretty atrocious against infantry. In fact, the Squigs are being forced to rampage, which will put them in a terrible spot. They'll get kind of slaughtered in the pits with that. Over here you can see the Rusty Arrows are in a bad spot here in melee. And really my infantry line is doing a great job here, just chopping through these Squigs. The spears are a very good counter to any Orc cavalry. Savage Orc Arrow Boys unfortunately will trade pretty well against Spearmen. You can see over here Balthazar does rally on 358 HP, so he's just sitting there, not really able to do much of anything. While over here the Reichsguard does pile in and is trying to crush these Night Goblin Squig Hoppers once and for all. In the meantime, in the pits here, you can see the spears still slugging out with the Savage Orcs. There's quite a bit of healthy units of spears, and you can see some of these Reichsguard on 120 kills, just doing a great job trying to shut down these big troops. I should have been more competent at cycle charging them, so definitely a big mistake on my part. You can see the Orc Boar Boy Big Guns kind of getting wiped out a little bit. Even the Broken Tusk Mob at this point are in a very bad spot. You can see a Plague of Rust going down on them just to debuff them and get their armor in a more reasonable spot for my troops to shoot down. And you can see the Squig Herd just getting slowly but surely chipped away at, down to just less than 15 models. And I'm trying to flee here with Balthazar. I don't want to be hit by Azag, but really not a chance here. Spirit Leech does come out and is going to hit him and finish off the man himself. So he's gonna drop here, dropping pretty quick. Actually, I'm not entirely sure if it kills him or if it just routs him off the field. But poor Barfazar isn't making a comeback after this. That said, in the pits, the spears are holding very well. The Broken Tusk Mob doesn't have good melee stats, really, despite being a pretty elite unit. None of these units really have very good stats, the Orc cavalry units. That's why I'm personally not a big fan of them. But you can see the spears do get routed, unfortunately, because of Azag's presence there. But otherwise, these troops are in some very bad shape. You can see the Greatswords just hacking and slashing. And despite the fact that Barfazar is going to flee the field, you can see the balance of power is definitely starting to shift in my favor. You can see over these spears slugging it out with the gobos. You can see crossbow fire is actually going to pepper these Orc Boar Boy Guns. You can definitely see how that 60 armor is not doing these guys any favors as they get mown down by a bunch of crossbow fire. And I do try to make sure to finish them off here and make sure they shatter so they won't be making a comeback. Over here, the Squig Herd does shatter. I'm able to get a bunch of shatters on my opponent's troops. You can see the Knights of the Blazing Sun still running amok. One of the cool things about the Knights of the Blazing Sun that you don't really get to see here is the fact that they do have resistance to magic. So if my opponent had brought a Fate of Buna, for example, these guys would be taking a little less damage if he decided to cast on them. Actually, quite a bit less damage. Over here, Spears slugging out with Goblins. I'm not entirely sure who would win. I think the Spears do because they do have slightly better stats. Actually, quite a bit better stats, I guess. Over here, the Knights of the Blazing Sun are going to get charged by Azag, but Azag definitely has to be careful. Despite the fact that he has poison and armor piercing and a huge charge bonus, he does not have very good melee defense. 24 is atrocious. He only has 70 armor, which isn't the greatest either. And the Knights of the Blazing Sun will lay a smackdown on him. Fortunately here, I didn't kind of force path to surround him, and these guys are there's only a handful of them hitting him. So they're really not getting maximum value against Azag. There's only a few of them jabbing him, and they are starting to come under some peppering fire from those Savage Orcs. And they are going to rout here, after losing about 7 models, I think, there to those cleaving attacks from Azag. They themselves, of course, don't have the best of melee defense, so definitely a bit of an issue. And definitely, despite the fact that the balance of power here is very much in my favor, one of the things I have to be very aware of is if my opponent manages to rally some sort of line, he does still have a few troops kind of scattered out in the wastes, though most of them are kind of fleeing off the field. Azag does have Fear and Terror, so of course if he dives in, he could potentially rat all my troops, and I would be in some deep, deep trouble. So what I'm trying to do is catch Azag. I want to wipe out his infantry here. I want to get these annoying shooting troops off the field, get rid of the Rusty Arrows, get rid of the Savage Orcs. You can see here he does terror out my spears. I'm simply not really able to do very much about it. I'm trying to get my crossbows into firing positions here, and you can see just so many troops wavering on both sides. These guys are just on the verge, under 5 leadership, on 2 leadership. These guys are on 5. Just nobody wants to be fighting at this point on both sides. The morale is in the pits for everybody. The crossbows over here are trying to pepper down Azag. You can see my last cavalry contingent, who's really my only hope of pinning him down, is being forced to rout again. They just don't have the morale for it. And you can see Azag does manage to take off. Unfortunately, you can't see my spears here. They're just shatter and rout. These gobos are sticking around, surprisingly. Fortunately, my spears, I did kind of start just dispatching troops out. If these spears got caught right now by Azag, it wouldn't really matter. There's just so many of them, and their morale is pretty high, so they would probably stick it out and slug it out with him. I'm confident that they can pursue my opponent's troops off the field. And over here, I'm simply trying to catch this Azag, get him pinned between my greatswords, get him pinned against my captain and my spears, and chip away at him. And you can see he finally does get caught here in the pits. He does try to cast a bunch of survivability buffs, but it's not going to save his day here. And he's going to be a dead man, or a dead orc, I suppose, in the pits here against the Empire. And that's going to be GG. So it looks like the game freezes a little bit there, which is not good. But definitely not the greatest thing when the game just decides to freeze up on you. But definitely, I think, I'm not sure what happened there, but definitely I think this demonstrates how powerful Empire Heavy Cav can be against the Greenskins. You can see every single one of my Heavy Cav units did an amazing job. Obviously, some of it was trashing goblins, but also some of it was trashing units like even Borbor big guns. They ran down some squig troops, some squig hoppers. They were running out squig herds, savage orc big guns, and all these units are getting torn apart. So Empire Heavy Cav can definitely do a great job, and really, when you're fighting against Greenskins, there's not really any reason to bring demigriffs or demigriff halberds. And I used to like bring them because I thought, oh, they're the best, they're the highest, they're the most elite troops. But honestly, they're not mandatory. They're not really necessary against the Greenskins. The only unit that will give you trouble is the Broken Tusk Mob, because they have so much armor. Had I been a little more on top of my micro with Balthazar, I could have debuffed these guys a whole bunch. I should have definitely been a little more wary about taking that engagement on top of the Squig Hoppers. That was a very stupid move on my part. But otherwise, your cavalry can definitely slide out with anything the orcs put on the field, including Orc Boar big guns, who just have atrocious melee stats. For the rest of it, I definitely think this is a pretty decent build. Crossbows give you some staying power against the enemy shooting line, against any skirmishers, against Mogreb's Mangy Marauders, all those annoying units. Empire Captains help you lock down the front line, prevent your opponent from just plowing through. Balthazar gives you some debuffs. I definitely should have been more wary of and more respectful of the enemy firing line. I simply allowed Balthazar to get shot to death by a bunch of savage orcs and the rusty arrows, which I should not have let happen. But he can be very potent. Great swords, of course. Great staying force against just about everything Greenskin, I think, except for black orcs and maybe nasty skulkers. These guys basically outtrade and are pretty efficient against any orc unit. Spears, as you can see, pretty good job. They obviously will outtrade goblins, and they'll do really well against, say, orc big guns. They'll really do well against basically any Greenskin cav. So definitely a good choice, and they're fairly cheap. So yeah, I think that overall this is a very solid build, and I would definitely recommend something similar if you're trying to deal with Greenskins. Just be aware that if your opponent brings a lot of armor with a lot of black orcs, you definitely, or an Arachnarok spider, for example, you really need to be on top of your micro, really know what you're doing, really be on top of your debuffs with Balthazar, make sure not to lose him. But by and large, you can there's definitely this sort of build will manhandle just about anything Greenskins put on the field. For my opponent's build, I definitely think he should have brought Fate of Buna on Azag. I think that's a very useful skill, unless you're going for some Doom and Darkness cheese, but he wasn't doing that with aspects of the Dread Knight. Otherwise, I do think this is an interesting and decent build. I'm not a big fan of Savage Orc Arrow Boys, despite the fact that they're raking some kills here. I definitely think he should have deployed his Squig Herds into my Greatswords rather than the Spears. They are not good counter to Spears. And otherwise, perhaps separate his heavy cav to prevent my heavy cav from absolutely pounding one of his flanks. It's obviously a little difficult to try to shut down such a cav heavy presence with four units of heavy cav, which is I invested a lot more into my cavalry than my opponent did. But it's often good to just try to tie down your opponent's cav. If you can get your Savage Orc big guns on top of your opponent's cav, it can definitely kind of help you get the win. So definitely try to tie down with your cav and get the Savage Orcs in there. Otherwise, yeah, I think this is a pretty cool build. Definitely pretty decent. I think it can definitely work. Perhaps a handful of Black Orcs in there would be nice as well. You could drop the try to cut some corners here or there, maybe cut some Gobos, or cut out some of the Squig Herd or something like that, and make room for a Black Orc or two. because Black Orcs will trash great swords and they'll hold their own even against Reiksguard and stuff. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent Stramon here. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions, anything like that, be sure to share, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.